On June 16, 1976, the Soweto township of Johannesburg, South Africa became the center of the anti-apartheid movement. On this day, the event known as the Soweto Uprising would become one of the most important events in South African history. In 1974, the Bantu education underwent reorganization. As a result, the South Africa's apartheid government enacted the Afrikaans Medium Decree of 1974, which forced schools to use Afrikaans in 50% of their instruction. Afrikaans was the language used by the white minority in South Africa and was seen as representative of the exclusionary nature of apartheid South Africa. Forcing to learn Afrikaans, an extremely difficult language, was understood as an attempt by the apartheid government to distance blacks from their culture. On June 16, 1976, over 20,000 students in Soweto began a peaceful march as protests against apartheid and Afrikaans in schools. The march, made up of students from the Soweto township, was supposed to end in Orlando Stadium, but unfortunately, the march never reached its finish line. The tensions between students and South African police only grew until the protest took a very violent turn, as police began firing tear gas and live ammunition into crowds of unarmed schoolchildren.
I live in an hectic society. I'm fingered for my questions. Aloof, my boldness stretches high in defiance. In me, the spirit of resistance, never diminish resistance.
The protesters continued to clash with the police, forcing the government to react.
The police, however, are actively engaged in restoring order, and there is definitely no reason for any panic. This government will not be intimidated, and instructions have been given to maintain law and order at all costs.
The enormity of the protest overwhelmed the South African police, forcing the military, armed with assault rifles, stun guns, and grenades, to come in and try to stop the protesting. The many years of built-up hate at the transgressions of the apartheid government had finally boiled over. Sadly, over 360 blacks were killed in the 1976 Soweto riots. Perhaps the most famous death was that of Hector Pearson, one of the first to be killed in the protests. News of the protests soon spread around the world, forcing countries to condemn the apartheid government. Boycotts of South African goods began, and the UN's Resolution 392 condemned the police actions in apartheid in South Africa. The Soweto uprisings triggered the beginning of the end to apartheid, showing the power of youth activism.
You know, I once read an article, and it said that Africa is a land of deferred dreams and prolonged problems. After over 50 years of independence on this continent, our people are still dying, starving, and neglected, while a small minority continues to prosper. I see no difference between our leaders now and our past oppressors. And what I've often asked myself is, when will enough be enough? When will Africans be angry enough? And Fees Must Fall was an answer to those questions. Fees Must Fall was a revival of an African revolutionary spirit. There had been major racial tensions, and students had been drawing from the anti-colonialist and black consciousness of Frantz Fanon and Steve Biko. The Rainbow Nation was crumbling. Then there was the Rhodes Must Fall campaign at the University of Cape Town, which began earlier on in the year. The movement was geared towards getting rid of a statue that commemorated Cecil Rhodes, who was a racist imperialist in Southern Africa. He committed great atrocities against Africans. Although the campaign was sparked by the statue of Cecil Rhodes, it was metaphorical for decolonization of Southern African institutions, and Fees Must Fall was seen as an extension of that decolonization project. There was also an increase in fees by 10.5% for the year 2016, which many working-class families and middle-class families could not afford. Lastly, there was outsourcing amongst South African universities, which deprived many workers of a living wage. The WITS student body, as well as other student bodies from across South Africa, and in particular the WITS Student Representative Council, which included Shayera Kala and Nompendulo Mkachwa.
So I think what we're very disappointed with is how this is a very superficial reaction to a very structural problem in our country. The funding of higher education in our country is a flawed system.
Listen to us. Your children have come and sat down on the floor of their home. Listen to us.
And the leadership of black women cannot go unnoticed, particularly the leadership of black queer women, hence the hashtag Bokodo must lead. On Wednesday, the 14th of October 2015, WITS students started a protest against the university's proposed fees increase of 10.5%, as well as an end to outsourcing. The hashtag WITS fees must fall was popularized. On Friday, WITS Vice-Chancellor Adam Habib sat for the students to hear their grievances, which led to the suspension of the price hike in the council meeting, as well as the exemption of all students and staff involved in the protests from disciplinary action. By the 19th of October, the protests had spread to UCT and Rhodes University, where a similar 10.3% increase in tuition fees had been announced. And by the 23rd of October in the UK, a group of 200 students had gathered in Trafalgar Square to stand in solidarity with the protesting students in South Africa. The movement's presence was being felt globally. On the same day, President Jacob Zuma held a meeting with vice-chancellors and student representatives from across South Africa to discuss a way forward at the Union Building in Pretoria. Whilst they were having the meeting, a large group of protesting students waited outside, and a small group of students turned violent, setting fire to portable toilets and breaking down the fence. The police responded with stun bullets and tear gas.
On the matter at hand, we agreed that there will be a zero increase of university fees in 2016.
WITS and the University of Cape Town also committed to ending outsourcing within their institutions. The movement also promotes a sense of economic empowerment. Even though apartheid ended in 1994, many South Africans are still not economically liberated. Therefore, it is important to reduce socioeconomic disparities in order to disrupt the poverty trap. And in many ways, that can only come through accessible tertiary education. The movement also catalyzed decolonization efforts in South Africa. Students were standing up to reclaim institutions and spaces from the white supremacy that had dominated South Africa since apartheid. They were saying that freedom is no longer enough, we need equality too.
From the 1976 Soweto uprisings to Rhodes Must Fall and now Fees Must Fall, student protests have occurred against the backdrop of intense social inequalities, and in post-apartheid South Africa, achieving racial and economic equity is the most relevant social mandate. As such, South Africa has witnessed its youth convert their anger into constructive and meaningful change for their peers, their elders, and future generations.